welcome back to the GamecockScoop.com podcast, the official podcast of GamecockScoop.com on Rivals. I'm Caleb, joined by Alan. We got some fun news, like right before we went live here. Wide receiver Lex Cyrus, who is from Pennsylvania and had a final two of Penn State and South Carolina, chose South Carolina, which is, maybe not the way that on paper you would have thought that would have gone. It's been kind of a fun week trying to figure that one out. Me and Richie Schneiderite, who is the publisher at the Penn State rival site, have both been kind of like figuring out what we could and talking back and forth to each other and talking to other sources. And I think we both kind of came to the point today where we were like, I wouldn't be surprised either way that it goes, which is kind of rare in this day and age with recruiting. So that was kind of fun to just like watch it with anticipation, just like everyone else, instead of kind of already having a feel for what was going to happen. We do have some quotes on the front page of GamecockScoop.com from Lex. Adam Friedman was able to get an interview with him prior to his commitment. And it sounds like one of the big things is while he was visiting here, spent a lot of time with Tyshawn Russell, and I think he's been still in contact with him. He says, I talked to Tyshawn Russell. He's a receiver from Bishop McDavid in Harrisburg. He's enjoyed being there, and this is only his second season. He saw the field a lot last year. He thinks they're going to have a big year this year. That's a quote from Lex Cyrus about Russell. So, yeah, I think the fact that Russell had come from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and come down maybe gave him a little confidence. But I think another big story here is just this is Mike Furrey's first big recruiting win, I think safe to say. And we got a quote from Lex Cyrus about Furrey as well. It says, I have a good relationship with Coach Mike Furrey. I visited twice, and on both visits, it just felt like the place I can be. I could see myself there. He's definitely shown me that he has the experience. He's worked with guys in the past, and he's done it himself. On my visit, even when he calls me, we talk a lot more than just football, about things like how he's going to develop me in life and beyond football. Also talked a little bit about how the staff plans to kind of move him around and be this versatile threat. For those of you that haven't looked into Lex Cyrus too much yet, he's a track star that's also a pretty good wide receiver. So he's got a 10.4 100-meter track time. He's won a gold medal in the 100 meters for the state of Pennsylvania state championships. He won that as a sophomore, and then as a junior, he podiumed again and got a bronze at the state championships in the 100 meters. So very fast guy. When you check out his film, a lot of the times they treat him almost like Debo-esque, I guess, in the sense of they try to get him the ball fairly close to the line of scrimmage, but then he does a lot with the ball in his hands. He has good vision, good speed, runs away from people. And so, yeah, that's going to be interesting. I do think his route tree could be slightly more developed, but I do think that's an advantage of having a coach like Mike Furrey here, who obviously developed his own NFL career despite not having maybe the athletic upside of someone like Cyrus. So if you can kind of bring those two elements together, I think that this is a really, really good get. And yeah, he could contribute sooner than later. Honestly, it wouldn't surprise me. Also, just looking at the depth chart and the way that some things might cycle out from this portal class and all of that. So anyway, fun get. Good first move for Mike Furrey, I think, and maybe kind of proves that he can go up against some of the big boys and win some of those battles, which he's going to need to over the next couple of years. So,
yeah, I think go ahead. There's another element to this too, which might go a little bit under the radar. I think one of the questions you maybe had after South Carolina lost Pete Lembo to Buffalo as a head coach is that was kind of your Northeast recruiting guy. Is Torian Gray is kind of that DMV area, okay, but Pete Lembo's a New York guy. He coached college ball at Lehigh. He's kind of was your guy who helped you a lot with maybe a Dante Reno out of Connecticut. Keenan Nelson Jr. was a Pennsylvania guy too, and you lost that. And I'm not going to say winning one recruiting battle out of Pennsylvania means you got it back, but I think that was, if you kind of look at this like a game of Risk almost, right? You're playing on the map and you lost your best guy in the Pete Lumba would like that reference. He's a history guy. You lost your best guy in the Northeast there recruiting, and you still found a way to win a battle there.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. So we'll see how his impact is made. One thing I was getting feedback wise about his decision was that his family really wanted him to stay close to home, which is fairly typical for someone that's a teenager or whatever. But I did think it was nice as I was watching the live stream. Whenever he revealed his Gamecock shirt, all of his family around him also were wearing Gamecock gear. So it seems like there's not a huge split, I guess, left behind there, and they're respecting his decision on that. We'll stay in the recruiting realm for a little bit longer. So earlier this week, University of South Carolina named Darren Usher as the Gamecocks' new director of player personnel and recruiting. We talked last week about Taylor Edwards no longer being in that position. A little bit of background on Usher for you guys. He most recently came from Oregon, and 2024 class was ranked as high as number 3 nationally, according to the press release from the University of South Carolina. Granted, the situation of recruiting at South Carolina is going to be a little bit different than recruiting at Oregon.
He's also had some throwing money cannons around.
Yeah, that might help. The NIL issue might be a little bit harder to navigate without all the Nike money. But I will say Usher has spent some time in the SEC. He was the director of football recruiting at Auburn and ended up with 2 top 25 recruiting classes in his time there. And before that, he was at Boise State, which obviously does not have all of the recruiting advantages in the world. And all 7 years that he was on staff, they had the Mountain West #1 recruiting class. And obviously pretty good record because they always have a good record. So, and the added benefit is he has a degree from South Carolina back in 2009. So he's coming back home and has a pretty good resume. We've already seen in the last week a couple of offers go out to some 2026 guys from him, so kind of hitting the ground running. And yeah, I think it's a good hire. I mean, obviously that will be clearer in retrospect after a couple of classes come together, but it seems like he's going to be pretty actively involved. And I don't know if you had any other notes from that.
Yeah, other than I really, you're not going to do the social, or at least I'm not going to do the social media thing of acting like I know every move this guy's made the last 10 years because South Carolina hired him yesterday. I think we got to be realistic about what you know and don't know, but the track record's there, the resume checks out. I think the point you mentioned about Auburn's important, just having SEC experience. This is it is different. Oregon, Boise State, that's different. The geography is obviously very different in terms of just the high schools they're going into and kind of the relationships you have to build. So I think those 2 years at Auburn are a very useful part of the resume, almost as much as even the Oregon part. And they had to make a move quick. I definitely did think that. I think we talked about it on the show last week, but you just can't really go a long time in modern college football with the way recruiting is so 24/7, 365. You had to make a move there quick to fill it, even in the summer. And you did. And I don't know how involved he was in something like Lex there today, but that's at least a good sign, I guess. But you're going to have to, I guess, sort of trust the process. This is a year, 2 years, 3 years thing till you actually start seeing results one way or another. And especially in the portal, too, you're going to have to wait for after this season to see how he works that.
Yeah, speaking of those Auburn ties, I know he sent out a couple of 2026 offers to some Alabama kids that he was recruiting while he was at Oregon. So maybe already kind of seeing some of that come to fruition. But yeah, it'll be interesting. I mean, it probably will have a bigger impact on the 2026 class than the 2025 class, which is already more or less put together, although there are still some targets still out there, which several of them are announcing in the coming weeks. You got the edge actually from Alabama, Jared Smith. So, maybe that tie there will make a difference. And several others that are set to announce. I saw what is it? Isaiah Sowles just put out a top 3 with South Carolina in it. South Carolina, Louisville, Kentucky, and he's going to announce next week. Anyway, I'll have all of it on the weekly recruiting wrap up. But there's several more targets announcing in the coming weeks that I think South Carolina is in good position with. So good July for recruiting so far. And there's still one more welcome home out there from June, I believe, as well. So anyway,
yeah, that was number 18 today in that class. So we talked about you're probably going to end up in the low 20s for this class. So there's still a few spots on the board there.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, wouldn't surprise me if it's 23 to 25 ish, and then you'll fill in the rest from the portal. But we'll see how it plays out. Also, next week is SEC Media Days. This past week, we saw the Big 12 kind of kick everything off.
Oh, we got a comment here. Jaquavius Dodd, good to see you in the stream. Appreciate you watching on. He says, we aren't done yet. # class of 2025 with the Spurs up in the Gamecock.
That's awesome. Yeah, Jaquavius Dodd, 4-star edge, in-state guy from the class of 2025. So, yeah, we'll, you can let us know if you know of anything. Anyway, SEC Media Days talking season is getting going next week. South Carolina announced that Debo Williams, linebacker, defensive tackle, Alex Huntley, and wide receiver Luke Doty will be the 3 player representatives. Any thoughts on those 3 guys? And I guess you'll be out there. It's Dallas this year, right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So I think once you it looks weird on the surface. I definitely did a little bit of a double take when I saw the Luke Doty news. I guess that dropped on Monday. When you kind of think about what Beamer's done historically, he likes having older players who've been in the program a while. He doesn't do new transfers. That's kind of a hard and fast rule for him. Even when Spencer Rattler came his first year, he didn't go to media days till he actually played for South Carolina after a season. So that kind of knocks out any of your true freshmen. So no Dylan Stewart, no Rocket Sanders because no transfers. Lenoris is still an underclassman. So you kind of had to, I don't want to say get creative, but maybe the names people from other beats or national media were expecting to see from South Carolina aren't going to be there. But Debo Williams, I've kind of been calling him the glue guy of this defense for a little bit. Not surprised to see him. Boogie, same deal. I think the Luke Doty question is, and I think all 3 of those are good choices behind the podium, professional. You're not going to have an Oklahoma State situation like they had at Big 12 Media Days. We were talking about that before we got on the show here. I think Debo and Boogie kind of speak for itself. But while we're on the subject, and, it's just we're talking in summer, what do you think Luke Doty's role actually is this year? Like, what do you kind of see for him?
I mean, I think he's going to get some snaps at receiver. I think it's possible that we see him being sure-handed back there as a punt returner or something. I mean, maybe not. Yeah, I mean, I think he's going to play a role, but I think the deeper thing about having him represent you at SEC Media Days is you have this era, right, where it's the second that, you don't necessarily start in the role that you're hoping to start, you transfer out. I think Luke Doty is a good representative of someone that committed to a school out of high school and has stuck with it and done pretty much whatever they asked of him throughout his career. So maybe a little bit of contrast there and just, a good representative of the university. It makes sense to me.
Yeah, so I'm skimming this list right now. Of course, you have 16 teams at SEC Media Days this year, not the 14 from the past years. Let's see, 3, 4. There's 5 teams who are not bringing a quarterback. So South Carolina's already in a pretty tight group there. The other teams who are not bringing their starting quarterback or projected starting quarterback are Vanderbilt, Texas A&M, Tennessee. I guess it's because Nico hasn't really played yet. South Carolina, obviously, and Kentucky. And I guess that's because Brock hasn't played yet. So kind of in line with the rest of the league. I mean, most of the other teams, like I'm just looking, Quinn Ewers is going to be there. Jackson Arnold for Oklahoma, who we're going to talk about here in a second, is going to be there. Brady Cook will be there. Jackson Dart, Grant Nussmeier, Carson Beck, Graham Mertz. Yeah, so not really surprising, but A lot of QB star power there at media days this year for the Dallas people.
Yeah, and then for those of you who haven't kept up with our SEC Media Day coverage, what can people expect next week from you?
Yeah, I'm actually only going to be there the first day because Dallas is far away. But I will have South Carolina coverage. We'll have notes from Beamer. He'll talk off podium before he goes on kind of the TV thing. So we'll have updates from that. Talk to all three of the players who are there. We'll have stories from them coming the few days kind of after media days. And just kind of try to get a feel for what these players are expecting and kind of what the general vibe is here as we don't have a schedule yet, but probably about 3 weeks away right now from camp starting, at least based on what it's been the last couple of years.
Yep. And we'll definitely hop on the podcast next week after you get back and kind of break down everything that we saw over there. But on GamecockScoop.com, we'll have plenty of written coverage as it's all unfolding. I'll probably be on watching it on TV and pulling some quotes from that duty while you get the exclusive ones from being there. Let's talk a little bit more about South Carolina's schedule. So we've been kind of doing this game by game breakdown throughout the past few weeks on South Carolina's schedule. We are through Alabama. So if you want to hear that, go back to last week. We've done every game kind of in sequential order from there. There's also plenty of written previews on GamecockScoop.com. I just now got through Ole Miss, so the written ones are a little behind the podcast ones. But we've talked a lot about just how tough this October stretch is. So you get a bye week, you get a home game against a probably top 10 Ole Miss, you get a away game against a probably top 10 Alabama, at least preseason top 10. And then you finish it up with a back-to-back road trip ending in Oklahoma, and they'll very likely be a top 20 preseason team as well. A little bit of a weird one, hard to know what to expect. Obviously, Oklahoma coming from the Big 12, had a pretty good season last year. Still kind of trying to figure out what the Brent Venables experience is at Oklahoma, I think. We know that the defense is going to be good, but it'll be interesting to see how they transition to life in the SEC. I do think that they probably have a little bit of a tougher road to hoe than Texas in that transition. So I guess what are your expectations of this game and how it falls on South Carolina's schedule?
Yeah, I think the first thing you point out there is we talked about this. I mentioned it for a second on the show last week, and obviously South Carolina is not coming off an easy game themselves from Bama, but you're catching Oklahoma the week after Red River. No bye week in between, no nothing. So whether that's Oklahoma winning the game on their schedule that they care about the most and is the biggest game to them and having a possible letdown spot, I guess that could work against you if Oklahoma loses to Texas and comes out mad the next week or refocused or whatever. It maybe works your way physically if Oklahoma gets beat up by a pretty physical Texas team at the line of scrimmage. There's a lot of ways that can go, but I think that's when we talk about kind of the sequencing here and where that falls in the schedule. I think it's noteworthy you catch Oklahoma right after Red River. I think it's noteworthy. Same thing as Alabama. We talked about it last week. Not a night game. They haven't announced an actual start time yet, but it'll either be 11 or noon local time. It's in that early window is what they're calling it now. So you don't have to deal with the road night game thing there. As for Oklahoma as a football team this year, I don't want to say I'm low on them. I think we did the power rankings for the SEC last week. If you want to go back and listen to that, Caleb and I both ranked everyone in the league 1 through 16. You know what a Brent Venables team is. It's, add water and defense, poof, right there. I think there's still a very fair offensive question to be had here. You lost Dylan Gabriel to Oregon. Jackson Arnold played in the bowl game, but hasn't played a ton elsewhere. That offense was pretty good for large chunks of last year, but you're replacing a lot there. Where would you put this? I think maybe the question to ask is in terms of winnable games on this schedule. I mean, it's obviously not in the top 5 or probably even in the top half, but
I don't know. Yeah, I would definitely put it as a lean Oklahoma almost entirely because it's at Oklahoma and it's in the midst of that tough stretch. But I do see a path that South Carolina could compete in this game. Like you said, there's a lot of unknowns on offense. So defensively, I think Oklahoma is going to be very good. They return 11 of their top 13 tacklers from last year, so they're just going to be right back to the defense that we saw last year, maybe even a little bit better. But on offense, you lose Dylan Gabriel, who's one of the all-time leaders in passing yards. He's going to Oregon. The backup, what was that? Arnold.
Yeah. Former 5-star.
What's his first name?
Jackson.
Yeah. Jackson Arnold. Like you said, former 5-star, so definitely has some talent. But really, the only extended action he got last year was the bowl game. He did kind of practice all through bowl practice, I think, with the idea that he was going to start it. And he did throw for 361 yards and 2 touchdowns, but he also committed 4 turnovers. So he's going to have to clean that part up. Maybe that was just first start jitters against a pretty good Arizona team. The other thing is that the offensive line is almost completely brand new. I mean, they brought in several portal guys that can kind of contribute immediately. But how well is that going to gel? I mean, you'd assume by midseason they're going to be kind of whatever they are. But it wouldn't surprise me if the offense takes a little bit of a step back this year and they get into some ugly SEC style games with a good defense and a kind of middling offense.
So this is a game where we're going to know this is game 7 on the schedule, week 8 of the season. You're going to know if this defense is kind of what you and I think both think it could be, probably the most talented one of the Beamer era. A strength of this team, I think you would say you feel better about the defense and the offense right now. If it's what it should at least keep you in the game. I think, again, sitting here on July 11th, you don't know who's going to be. The further you get into these previews, the harder it is because you don't know who's going to be healthy or how teams are going to look the way from the season it gets. But sitting here in July, defense keeps you in. I don't know. It kind of feels like that A&M trip last year, sort of, where A&M also had a really good defense. Offense was questionable, and you hung in that game. I think it was a 7-point game in the fourth quarter and ended up getting away from you. I'm not going to sit here and make a prediction on July 11th, but it kind of feels like that kind of game where if you're going to have to score some points, but your defense can keep you in it if these teams look the way we think they do this far out.
Yeah, I will say of all the previews that we have done and even looking at the schedule at large, Oklahoma feels like the biggest unknown. I just don't really know what to expect at all, especially on offense. Maybe next week when we do Texas A&M, we'll say a similar thing because I don't really know what that team is going to be either. So yeah, these 2 middle games, honestly, Oklahoma and A&M, could have a big impact on the way the season goes. I think if you're going to have an exceptional season, you probably need to win one of those 2. And if you're not, you better not trip up anywhere else. You actually asked a pretty interesting question a second ago, though, which was to kind of like rank the difficulty of opponents. Do you have the schedule in front of you? You think we could do that real quick on the fly?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, let's go easiest to most difficult. My easiest is probably Wofford.
Yeah, I think no question.
Yeah,
it's your FCS game.
Yeah, exactly. Get them the week before Clemson. I always like when they set up the schedule that way. I think it makes sense after the tough SEC schedule to have a little bit of a break before you get that rivalry game in. My second hardest, probably Akron. I mean, I think you can make a argument for Old Dominion there as well. But just based on the season that Akron's coming off of and the unknowns that they have.
I'm with you. Old Dominion still went to a bowl game last year as a Sun Belt team, which is a better league than the MAC. I think we would both agree Old Dominion's third on that list if you're ranking winnable games. And I'm going to go ahead and say we both probably have Vanderbilt fourth. Just getting into the Power 5 teams.
Yeah, so those are your 4 should wins. And then it starts to get a little hairier. You start to get into more toss-up games. My 5th most difficult game is probably Kentucky.
5th most winnable, right? We're going like
win. Yeah.
Okay.
5th most winnable game is probably Kentucky, and we've talked a few episodes ago if you want to go back and look at it. But that feels like one you pretty much have to win. But I wouldn't call it a automatic win by any means.
Yeah, I'm with you, and that's you say that out loud. It's like that's the 5th most winnable game. It sounds like it's disrespecting Kentucky. I think it's more respecting what else is on the schedule and kind of what's coming down the pipe after Kentucky.
Yeah, I think that's true. The next one probably is the hardest because for me, you're looking at A&M, you're looking at LSU, maybe Missouri, but I think Missouri is probably a step above those two. I'm going to go ahead and say A&M, but mostly just because I haven't looked into them deep enough, and I could flip them in LSU next week, but I'm going to say A&M's your 6th most winnable game.
I'm going to stick with what we talked about. I don't remember what episode it was a few weeks ago where we kind of looked at that 2-game stretch in September. It's kind of your first big ones with at Kentucky and then LSU. I'm not – we talked about them on the show already. You can go back and listen, but I'm not totally sold on LSU replacing a Heisman Trophy winner. And I think the fact that you catch them so early when they do have a tough game week 1 against Southern Cal, so they're not going to be completely figuring it out for the first time against a Power 5 opponent, but you're still catching a new quarterback's first true road game in week 3. And for all that, I would say LSU at 6 for me.
Then do you have A&M right after them?
Yeah, just flip it. That's
7. So we just have them flip. So basically we've created a scenario, though, I think, where you got to win those 4 that I think you should win: Wofford, Akron, Old Dominion, Vandy. You got to beat Kentucky, and then you need to win at least one of a home game against LSU or a home game against A&M to get bowl eligible. That seems doable. Like it seems like that's something that could happen. Okay, after that, though, I think you transition to a category that's like unlikely to win. Maybe you'd put Missouri in a toss-up category too. Missouri would be my next team on the list, but I think that they're probably a tier above.
That's not. I had Clemson at 8.
Okay.
I think.
Do you put that in a pure toss-up, or would you put that in a?
No, I still think that's a game I wouldn't have as a toss-up, even, but it's closer to the toss-up line than any of these other ones. I am high on Missouri. I think having the Brady Cook Luther Burden connection back alone makes the offense really, really dangerous. They portaled pretty well, both sides of the ball. I think the Clemson thing, and we'll talk about them more, definitely during the season, but also when we get to that episode of the podcast. They lost a lot of NFL talent, like really, really good, especially on defense. And it's not like, I'm sure some Clemson fan will find this and clip it and, hey, you're trying to just mess with Dab. But like, they didn't portal anybody. They got 0 players in the portal. And the recruiting's still really good there. I think the roster is definitely still more talented than South Carolina's 1 through 85. But if we're talking about, like, if we're ranking in a vacuum, like you're essentially doing Clemson, Ole Miss, Missouri, Alabama, Oklahoma ranking here. Yeah, I think a rivalry game on the road against a team with a lot of talent to replace is a more winnable proposition than, I'll put it this way, the Clemson team South Carolina beat 2 years ago is, I think, a lot better than the one Clemson that's coming back this year. And South Carolina played very poorly last year in the Clemson game, and it never felt like they were in it, but lost by 9. I'd still pick Clemson to win it and have Clemson favored by at least a touchdown. But I think that's a more winnable game than the other 4 we haven't talked about, or I haven't talked about.
I guess I put Clemson and Missouri on kind of a similar plane, but the South Carolina-Missouri game is in Columbia, and the South Carolina-Clemson game is in Clemson, which is where I split that hair, but I could see either being next up there. And then from there, you have Oklahoma, Alabama, Ole Miss left, so we literally have narrowed down that the 3 hardest games are that 3-game stretch in October. I do think Oklahoma would slot in there. And you could make an argument that Oklahoma is actually potentially an easier matchup than Missouri or Clemson. I'd be fine with.
Did you have Clemson at 9? Was that your?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So you slid the Clemson, Missouri. Because I had Missouri at 9.
Yeah.
How would you, So I think we both agree that at Alabama's 12, like the toughest game on the schedule was at Alabama.
Yeah, it's tough because I think Ole Miss potentially is the better team, in 2024. I mean, we'll find out, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, you at least get that one at home. You at least potentially could be 4-0 at that spot. Could be a rowdy night game that kind of like evens some of the playing field, or a 3:30. I know that that's that flex spot or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think still going on the road to Alabama is probably still the toughest spot, but I wouldn't begrudge anyone for making an argument for either one of those.
Yeah, and then you take the other two. I think based on everything we just talked about, Oklahoma is your 10, Ole Miss is your 11. We've talked about both those games the last 2 episodes on the show, but again, you could split the hairs. You could say Oklahoma is tougher or lower on like the win probability because it's on the road, but I just feel like there's a lot more known quantities with the Ole Miss roster than the Oklahoma one right now.
Also, just the way it matches up with your roster, right? Like,
yeah.
I think you can muddy up a game with Oklahoma and both play good defense and win a low-scoring game. Whereas I don't know if South Carolina quite has the offensive firepower to keep up with that Ole Miss offense that's going to be one of the best in the country.
Yep, I'm with you. So I guess we did just rank the schedule. When you break it down that way, you definitely got to win all 4 of those first 4 we mentioned, and 2 out of 3, right, of those middle pack. And then if you can find a way to win all 3 of those, which I think is a bit of a stretch, then you're definitely sitting in good shape. But the 4 at the top, 2 out of the 3 in the middle, that gets you to a bowl game, and then everything else, you're just kind of in bonus territory trying to figure out if you could maybe steal one of those other 5 and get to 7 wins or more.
Yeah, and I mean, I do think there's a case to be made for stealing one at Clemson, one at home against Missouri, maybe at Oklahoma, depending on how beat up you are coming out of all of that. So yeah, it when I first saw the schedule, I think me and probably most of the fan base were pretty doom and gloom about how difficult it was. But I think as we've started to break it down and look at what these teams actually are on paper, other than just the front of their jerseys, I think a bowl season should be the expectation. And then if, the offense clicks better than we think and the defense is what we think it is, maybe you really could push to that 7-8 win mark.
Yeah, and we're getting into more kind of stuff you would talk about the last week of camp or like overall season stuff, but I think the bowl is just it's not going to be easy. Like I certainly wouldn't be surprised if things broke wrong and you like tip back to 5-7, but like there is no scenario where you're sitting here in November at 5-7 and happy about the way things went. Like that, the minimum bar for like feeling good about things is 6.
Yeah, I mean, year 4 of the Beamer era, right? Bowl should be the minimum expectation. I feel like, regardless of the difficulty of the schedule, which it definitely is. Anyway, so I guess that was a breakdown of Oklahoma, but also kind of led to an interesting,
more existential conversation.
Any other notes, I guess, on Oklahoma specifically that you had that we didn't cover?
No, I think we got it. I guess that wraps up October. They got that second bye week after October, and then it's on to November and A&M when we're back on the show here next week.
Yeah, and I do think that those bye weeks fall pretty well. We didn't really factor that in when we were talking about the difficulty of A&M, but maybe that moves them up a little bit in the winnable category because of the way that bye week falls, and you get them at home. And yeah, it'd be interesting to see how that plays out. That's another. We'll talk about it next week, but that's another team that I just really don't know what to expect based on the change in philosophy. A lot of people portaling in and out over the offseason, so that'll be interesting. All right, I think that about covers it. We'll have full SEC Media Day coverage on GamecockScoop.com. I'll have some more previews, some more recruiting news, just lots of fun stuff coming up. I know, Steven, or you just put out an Olympic look at all former Gamecocks that are in the Olympics. So those of you that are going to be watching the Olympics in the next few weeks, go check that out.
Got the baseball draft the next week.
Yeah, a lot of fun things coming up. I'm really interested. We haven't talked a ton about that, but I'm really interested to see what happens with Morlando and a couple of those highly rated freshmen. Because if you end up getting those guys on campus, then I think the roster really starts to come together in an interesting way. But
yeah, I think that one's pretty unlikely, just straight up. I think he's probably going to get a 7-figure signing bonus from a team. But some of the other ones I think might be more in play from the high school class. And then obviously, like we talked about last week. Go ahead.
I will say I agree, but I will say also on social media, it does seem like he's like a fan, like a South Carolina fan.
Yeah.
So, sometimes the heart makes decisions that don't necessarily follow the logic of the money. So we'll see how that plays out.
Yeah, but we'll have draft coverage next week, Dallas coverage, and we'll be back here one day next week to talk about media days, the draft, A&M, all that fun stuff.
Yep. Until next time, this has been the GamecockScoop.com podcast. We'll see you.